Hey guys, welcome back to ILR Performance. This is part one of a two-part video series on this Tecate 4 hybrid. We call it a hybrid because it's a KX250 top end, later model two-wheeler on a Tecate 4 four-wheeler low end. To get to this point, we have about 100 hours with the motor on the dyno. That's multiple pipes, custom building a couple of pipes. You're just going to see about an hour's worth of video all total of that total 100 hours, but thought we'd share some stuff with you. It's pretty interesting. These are pretty cool motors, and everybody's been looking for a video on one of these, so enjoy. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, welcome back to ILR Performance. It's finally sunny out. It's kind of nice around here in the Northwest. Weather's warming up, so time to get outside a little bit. Today we're going to do some dyno runs on this hybrid Tecate 4 motor. This is a Tecate 4 bottom end with a 2000 KX250 top end on it. The cylinder has been bored out to 73 millimeters and the crank's been stroked to 75 millimeters, so it's a big bore and a stroker. This particular motor does not like any of the production pipes that I've built in the past or any of the ones that I have hanging on the shelf. So this is a custom built pipe. You can see that in order to get it to fit in there properly, we built a lowboy pipe. This pipe design is something that's intended to maximize the overrun at the top. This particular cylinder runs out of airflow at a fairly low RPM because when they built it, Kawasaki was working on torque. They're trying to build a really strong mid-range motor for the motocross track, and consequently they were willing to give up some top end. You kind of see that in the dyno runs, that this motor comes up to its peak pretty early, but what it does is it builds really good torque and just beautiful smooth torque curves, which is ideal for a quad where we have a lot more weight and a lot more traction. So right now we have the base dyno set up. We have a 39 PWK Kian. It's one of our dyno carbs. We have the high flow factory Kawasaki intake manifold for the KX. We have a stock reed block and a set of stock reed pedals on it. That's going to be our baseline. It's a good place to start from. This particular motor also has a PVL ignition, a digital PVL, so it does have an internal rotor ignition on it. It's got plenty of good spark, which is always nice to have. So let's get to it, do some dyno runs. We're going to do a couple of different carb changes on this particular one. Derek sent me a really cool intake setup that I haven't dynoed before, so we're going to see how it works. It's a pulse induction intake. And of course we got to run it with Lectron on it and see how that thing works. And then we've got some power valve changes. We're going to make the power valves open a bit earlier and see whether it likes that or doesn't like that. So let's get to doing some dyno runs. Okay, so we ran the motor. We made about 5 pulls on it to make sure it had good temp, and then we adjusted the water temp. We try and start all our pulls within a couple of degrees of each other so that we don't have water temp as a factor. And so with the PWK and a 170 main jet, motor ran pretty good. You'll see this little bump. It's in most of the dyno pulls on a Tecate 4. That happens to be when the power valve opens, and it's because it gets a blip because the power valve opens faster than the motor really wants it to. It's a issue with the hybrid motors. I guess it's not really an issue. It just shows up more on the hybrid motors. And if you watch my video on building a hybrid, you'll know why. But so you'll see this bump in there. You feel it a tiny bit when you're riding, just as a hit in the pipe, but it really goes right on past that. So We ended up with pretty decent horsepower, 39 horsepower at 7,700 RPM. Like I talked about, this particular cylinder makes really good torque, but it does limit the airflow. We're trying to push 315 cc's through a set of ports that were originally designed for just shy of 250 cc, which is why we see airflow limitations up near the top end. And you can see our horsepower peaked at 7,700 RPM. That's a factor of the port flow as well as how long the pipe is. We did have a nice torque building up. The torque peaks. It carries for a little while, but you know, it gradually curves down. So you know, pretty decent run. You know, we've got some EGTs that are a little bit lower than what we want. So what we're trying to really do is get this to carry on. We want the horsepower to carry on, and we need to do that by building a little bit more heat in the motor. So best way to build heat in the motor is to lean it down. So we went ahead and dropped it from a 170 to a 168 main, and the motor kind of liked that. You can see there's still a little bump right there, but most of it went away. What you can really see here is the torque built up, but then it carried over for a long time. I mean, it peaks fairly low, decent peak, a little over 28, but it does carry real nice. But what you can see, we got up here, we didn't get much more horsepower, but we carried longer. I mean, you can see that it carried all the way out. And our peak moved all the way up to 8,150 RPM, so basically 8,200 RPM, and we got just shy of 40 horsepower out of it. So the motor really liked that. So as always, you know, we took a look at the EGTs. The EGTs bumped up a little bit, but not appreciably, so we're going to go ahead and drop it down again. And this shows the difficulty in trying to jet a key-in without a dyno and without spending a lot of time on it. So we dropped down to a 165 main jet, and the motor fell on its face. So you can see what happened is as it pulled up, it made good torque right up to about where it was before, but then it fell on its face. It came up, you can see where the torque peaked here, but then the horsepower really struggled. We dropped our peak back to 7,700 RPM. 7,700 RPM is where the pipe is tuned for, so that is going to be where the motor really wants to come up on peak. We're going to get some more horsepower just by carrying it longer, but really that's where the motor is going to want to always move to. But you can see, taking a little bit of fuel out of it did not like that. And you can see the temps actually came back down a little bit, because what's happening is we're burning all the fuel. There's not enough left to make horsepower, and consequently the exhaust temps are a little bit colder. So 168 was the sweet spot. We did back up all the runs with multiple runs after we got a graph, and it's pretty consistent. It likes the 168. We just swapped out to the 38 millimeter Lectron. This is the standard Lectron. It's not a high velocity, it's not a Bilotron. We are going to run it with this 38 millimeter carb. We pulled a 39 millimeter key-in off. We're going to put the 38 on. That's going to give us an idea whether the motor wants more air or less air from the intake side. If we don't see any change at all, then we know that we're about the right carb size. If we see any drop, we know that we maybe need to bump up to the 40 millimeter carb. And we're going to see how the Lectron compares with the PWK. All right, so after we swapped our Lectron on, I'm just going to show you this real quick. This is just entertaining and information. This is the Lectron out of the box. This is what happens when you're too rich. You can see we came out of the hole real well, built really good horsepower until the motor started storing a bunch of fuel in the bottom end, and then it just fell on its face. I mean, it made a pretty smooth dyno run. It even had halfway decent EGTs, but they did fall in the end. And this is what happens when you take a carburetor out of the box and throw it on a motor without spending some time on it. other than the fact that it's on the dyno and it fell on its face, you hardly notice it when you were running, other than the fact that it wouldn't be very fast. So we played with the Lectron a little bit, leaned it back down, and this is where we came up with for power with the Lectron. So you can see the Lectron came out of the bottom really well. It pulled nice and smooth. You can see that little blip just above 6,000 as always. And it just carried and carried and carried, and it carried all the way over to, again, right about 8,100 RPM. You can see that we got a nice little gain in temperature. This curve up over here that carries on, it's coming from that gain in temperature. It's making the pipe act like it's a little bit shorter in tune length because it's building heat in the pipe. What's really nice about this pipe is it came up onto the torque, but when it got up onto the torque with the pipe and the Lectron, you can see how long it stayed flat. We made about 39.5 horsepower, 39.7 horsepower with the PWK. The Lectron made a little bit more horsepower at 40.3, 40.34. The Lectron made a little bit more horsepower because it's building more temp. Again, it's carrying longer because it's building more temp. When we tried to get more temp out of the PWK, it fell on its face because it ran out of fuel. And that's really the big difference between the PWKs and the Lectrons, is the Lectrons, they mix the fuel better, which is why you're getting the burn, the better burn for a longer period of time, and you're getting better temperatures. When you look at brake-specific fuel consumption, the Lectron made about 3/4 of a horse more, but it used 4% less fuel than the Kian did. So again, it's because the Lectron is a bit more efficient in the way it runs. But all in all, you can see both of them made good horsepower, nice, pretty curves. You know, if you were looking at this on a non-stroke T4 motor, the horsepower would have come down here and then built later and come back over. This is where the stroker motors and the later cylinders with the higher transfers and the smaller port volumes, this is where the newer cylinders are really picking up the power. All right, we got those runs in. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to change over to these Carbon Tech reeds. These are the medium tension reeds. They are a full carbon reed. We're going to see if this motor likes a little bit more reed tension. The last few dyno runs, we can see that it gets up into about 8,000 RPM, then it starts to drop off. That can either be where we've just reached the airflow of the pipe and the cylinder, or we possibly need a little bit more reed tension on there to get a bit more fuel in there at high RPM. So we'll make a couple of runs and let's see what the reed change does. Here's our dyno runs after we change the factory KX reeds to the carbon fiber medium tension reeds. As you can see, this motor really liked the reed change. Up here on top, we got a substantial gain in horsepower. We're clear up at 43.78 at just right at 8,000 RPM. You know, back here at 77 where we were seeing our peaks before, we're still at 43.5 horsepower, so huge gain. But what you can really see here is this long run where by just after 8,000 we're dropping. This is pulling all the way up to 8,500 RPM, and we're still seeing 43.5 horsepower. So big change. That's all coming from efficiency in the motor, again, building torque and building heat. You can see our torque peak is now clear up at 30. We were down at 28.25, 28.5 with the factory reeds. So our gains are coming from this torque peak coming up. That's where we're seeing a gain here. And this longer, flatter run out here and the higher EGTs are giving us this big long run out here. It doesn't mean that reeds are going to be worth 3 to 4 horsepower on every single motor. It just is telling us that in this particular motor, the factory reads just didn't have enough tension to seal properly at the higher RPM. In this case, we didn't lose any torque and we didn't lose any low-end power, which is a good sign, because that's generally the trade-off. As you add tension to the reeds, you gain on the top, but you lose on the bottom. That's why I chose to use the mid tensions and not the high tensions. I don't really think there'd be any gain going to a high tension here, but this is a sizable improvement, and that just again goes back and reinforces that you need to find the weakest point in the system, and when you change that weak point in the right direction, you see a big gain. These reeds consistently on a stock reed block make better power than any other reed that I've seen. I do have a V-Force reed that we're going to run in this next. V-Force reeds come with carbon reeds on them as well. We'll take a look at what that one does, but this really demonstrates on how much, when you find that one item that the motor's struggling and you make a change, you get a big leap in performance. So, you know, across the board, we're now seeing EGTs in the 1100 range, which is where we want to be. 1150, 1200 is where we want to be. This particular run was with 38 millimeter Lectron, no jetting change whatsoever. We're just keeping more of the, we're getting more of the fuel in the motor, we're keeping it in the motor, and we're burning it more effectively. I ran a couple of runs on this to back them up, and then I swapped out to the 38 or 39 millimeter PWK. Basically, the runs look virtually the same with both carburetors. Difference being the torque was a little bit better on the Lectron, and so consequently we made about 3/4 to 7/8 of a horsepower better with the Lectron than we did with the Kian. But you know, the carbs backed up. The same thing we saw with the other reed. You can't go wrong with either carb. The Lectron's just a bit more efficient on fuel, and it makes that little extra heat so it can, you know, get a little bit better peak and carry it longer. So impressive gain with just a reed block change on this combination. All right, so we went ahead and pulled out the factory reed block and put the V-Force reeds in. We started the run out with the same Lectron carburetor, made a couple of passes on that, played with the jetting. Not terribly happy with that. Went ahead and swapped it over to the back to the PWK. Interestingly enough, the Carbon Tech reeds liked the PWK better than the Lectron. It made about a horse more with the PWK than it did with the Lectron with the V-Force reeds. So let's go ahead and open it up. So here's the best run we got with the V-Force reeds. Pretty decent, you know, I mean, all in all, you look at the graph, this bump that we get's pretty much gone. Interestingly enough, that no matter where we set it, we couldn't get the motor to pull. I mean, the motor went ahead and ran out clean, but it just stopped making horsepower at 7,700. We could not get the run out. It didn't matter how much I leaned it out. I did end up running a 165 main with the PWK with these particular reeds, which does mean that they're probably keeping the fuel in the motor a little bit better because it didn't fall on its face quite as bad. But you can see felt pretty good right after 77. We gave up a bit of horsepower because we're clear back down to 38.5 horsepower. And our torque dropped back down below 28, so we're down to 27.5 foot-pounds of torque. So the peak horsepower number is lower only because of the torque number is lower. So the RPM curve was a good RPM curve. It meant we're burning the fuel real well, but we just aren't making the torque with the V-Force reeds. I leaned it down until the motor fell on its face with both Lectron and the PWK, and it didn't really care. The torque stayed a little bit low, and that's what consequently dropped our horsepower numbers. So V-force reeds ran good, dropped right in, fired right up, made nice pulls, but definitely didn't make as much horsepower as the Carbon Tech reeds did on the stock block. We're going to go ahead and end part one of this hybrid motor series. I'll post part two in a week or two. In part two, we go into some more technical aspects. We're going to make a change to the power valve, so we open the power valve quite a bit sooner. We're going to play with some other timing. We're going to go ahead and end this particular. We're going to go ahead and end part one here at this point in time. This is the combination of parts that the average person is going to run. Kind of give you an idea what a hybrid motor can run like. In part two, we're going to go into some more technical things, some of the kinds of changes that most people won't ever do to a motor like this, but some stuff that we've been talking about and wanting to do. It's a good opportunity to play with some timing a little bit, possibly do some head shape changes. We're going to swap out the power valve governor ball bearings to some heavier ones to make the power valves open quite a bit earlier. See if the motor likes that or doesn't like that. I've already made those runs, so I know the answer to that, but it's pretty interesting. So, as always, if you like the content, please subscribe to the channel. You'll get notified when when there's new videos coming out. Plus, helps me make more videos. And we'll call it an end for this video. Thanks for watching.